Coming up on Houston Newsmakers, President Donald Trump's proposed budget has some popular programs on the chopping block. How some fear these stark cuts could hurt Houstonians. Plus, making an impact on those who need our help the most. How a local festival is aiming to improve the lives of abused and neglected children in our community, and how you can help make a difference. And making strides in the fight against breast cancer. The link researchers are making between breast implants and a rare form of cancer.
From KPRC Channel 2, this is Houston Newsmakers with Cambrell Marshall.
Good morning and thank you for joining us. I'm Andy Sirota in for Cambrell Marshall. Steep cuts are on tap for parts of the federal government if President Donald Trump has his way. His proposed budget showcasing the sharpest snapshot yet of the president's spending priorities. He wants to increase defense spending by $54 billion. And that could spell trouble for several popular federally funded programs that many Houstonians rely on. The deep cuts he's proposing could have serious ramifications on Houston's arts community and senior citizens in our area who depend on outreach services. His budget proposal drawing strong and mixed reactions here at home. To talk more about the issue, I'd like to welcome my guests this morning. We have Martin Kaminsky, President and CEO of Interfaith Ministries for Greater Houston. Pat Jasper, Director of the Folk Life Program for the Houston Arts Alliance, and Mr. Paul Simpson, the Chairman of the Harris County Republican Party. Great to have all three of you here with us this morning.
Morning.
Martin, I want to start with you. Meals on Wheels plays such a critical role in our community. How much funding comes from the federal government, and how many seniors does it serve in our area?
Well, Andy, we have 4,000 seniors that we serve a hot meal to every weekday. And in addition to that meal, we're visiting the senior, crossing the threshold into their home, checking on them for safety, for wellness, and making a daily visit to check on that person. We get about 54% of our funding from federal sources, and that could amount to as much as $4 million for us.
So slashing the funding even just by a little bit would mean what for seniors in our area?
Well, it cost us $2,000 to take care of a senior year-round. So for every $2,000 we get cut, that means we lose the opportunity to serve a senior and care for them.
Pat, I want to move on to you. The arts are a big part of the fabric of our community. How does money from the National Endowment for the Arts help arts and education on so many different levels here in Houston?
Well, the National Endowment has been around for 50 years, supporting arts nationwide and actually literally reaching into communities throughout the city. There are many organizations such as Writers in the School, such as Project Row Houses, Alley Theater, all of them receive funding to reach out to and actually touch communities and bring the arts to them. National Endowment for the Arts funding also is provided to the Texas Commission on the Arts, which is a state arts agency, and scores of organizations in Houston receive funding from TCA, and those dollars include NEA dollars as well.
Paul, I want to move on to you. The president's budget outline certainly takes aim at trimming some questionable expenditures, but how does cutting services designed to help the arts and the elderly in our community, how does that make sense? How is that going to make sense for people here?
Well, just because a program is good doesn't mean it deserves federal funding. I think Reagan maybe famously said the closest thing to immortality is a federal government program. So Meals for Wheels, on Wheels, for instance, is a wonderful program. My kids participated in it as volunteers in high school, and I think they do a great job. And this funding, this budget actually does not cut specifically Meals for Wheels. The way Meals for Wheels is funded is far more complex. A lot of it is funded under, I think it's called the Administration for Community Living, which is part of the Human Health Services Department. That is a separate program. A lot of the other funding they're talking about comes through what they call block grants, chunks of money given to the states, and the states decide how to spend it. So there will be some cuts to those overall programs, but there's no line item of Meals for Wheels being cut out of the federal budget, number one. And number two, I think even if a program is good, you have to ask, is it worthwhile? Is it worthwhile, for instance, if you really needed funding for the arts? Is it necessary for a mother working 2 shifts in Pasadena to feed her kids and put food on the table, necessarily to support artists in New York who in their view of art? Is that really an appropriate expenditure of money, an appropriate way to take money away from hardworking Americans?
Pat, when we talk about the arts, we're also talking about the grassroots outreach into communities that, you know, have artists that may not necessarily make it onto a concert stage or into an exhibition hall. If money disappears on the national level, what is that going to mean for a lot of these programs?
Well, I think we just heard a version of a cliche that is used about public funding for the arts, which is that public funding for the arts is welfare for the rich, and somehow the more under-resourced, the more at-risk communities do not benefit. But in fact, public funding for the arts is very, very concerned with reaching into communities and treating and touching and actually interacting with the children and the families that you're talking about. And there's a proven example of the way in which the arts increase achievement at school, increase engagement in community. So there are all kinds of great reasons beyond the simple value and beauty and importance of the arts in our everyday lives.
Martin, is there a plan B on tap if funding is slashed for Meals on Wheels?
Well, Meals on Wheels is funded by a patchwork of support from many sources. Like I said, about 54% of it is from contracts and grants from the federal government, but 45% of it is funded by private entities. Shell Oil, Cisco Foods, Houston Endowment, Duddleston Foundation all give major support to make this happen. So we are relying on volunteers, we are relying on private support, but that public support makes a major difference to care for seniors in their later years.
Paul, do you believe the president's proposal is going to be a tough sell in Congress? Will members accept it?
I certainly hope they will. I think this is the will of the American people. Again, we have to ask about what do the American people want? And I think what you see is a lot of sort of elitist approach of the people knowing better than taxpayers do of how money should be spent. Again, you ask the refinery worker in Baytown, who's working long hours to support his family, to give money so that some Manhattan artists can do things like put the American flag in a toilet, which was one of the recently funded artworks that the NEA supported. And as far as Meals on Wheels, again, I think there's been a huge surge in private funding since these proposed budget cuts were announced. So I think there's plenty of money in the private sector to support both things like very worthy programs like Meals on Wheels, and certainly to support the arts. They don't need federal funding, because the other thing that I think that happens, it's been shown, is that when you are needing federal funding to support artwork, for instance, you don't so much come up with projects and artwork that the people want, but that some federal grant writer wants. And so it's important that we consider the needs of the American people, and I think the Congress will agree with that.
Pat, would you like to respond to that?
Paul, I would love to respond to that. A very good, you know, it's easy to distance these things and say that it happens in California or it happens in New York, but a great example of the way in which Houston has been served through public dollars for the arts is a project that was called Stories of a Workforce, celebrating the centennial of the Houston Ship Channel. And it actually told the stories of oil workers and ship channel workers in Baytown, because those are stories that aren't being told, and that there are venues that don't exist to tell them. And actually, NEA dollars directly reached in and made that project possible.
Okay. Well, this has been a very spirited discussion. Certainly we could spend a lot more time with it. I do appreciate your time this morning, all of you. Thank you so much. Giving a voice to abused and neglected children in our community. Coming up, the one-tool child advocates in Houston are using to raise awareness, how it includes fun for the whole family, and the huge impact it's having on so many lives. That's next when Houston Newsmakers continues.